Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, and as the channel name suggests, I cover true crime and trials. I cover trials past and present, just for those of you that want to revisit, or for those of you that want to catch up but do it in a quick manner, so you don't have to sit through hours and hours and hours of footage. So we are nearly done with the Casey Anthony trial, and next up is the defence's closing argument. So again, Baez begins by thanking the jury, and then next he moves on to saying that the key question of how Kaylee died hasn't been proven, which it hasn't. Then he goes through the rules of deliberation, starting with not basing their decision on emotion, and that has to be based on the evidence, which is true for juries around the world. And it's Baez's biggest fear that the jurors will base their decision on emotion. Then he says that the prosecution were basically hell-bent on making Casey look like a slut and a party girl. But yes, they did it. They put that impression across very well, but it was the facts and the evidence that was shown. But then again, I guess it's like editing live footage. You can choose what to put out there. The grisly, gory bits, or the boring stuff that puts someone in a good light. You know, you can pick and choose which bits to use and make someone either look extremely good or extremely bad. And as Baez points out, a lot of people did say that Casey was a good mother and she loved Kaylee and Kaylee loved her, and there was not one testimony of child abuse. And then he asked the jury to not speculate as to how Kaylee died. You can't. There's no evidence at all to base any decision of how Kaylee died. He says the car does not shed any light on how Kaylee died. It doesn't. And he says the car shows how Kaylee may or may not have been transported. It doesn't explain how she died in any way, shape or form. He says the prosecution were trying to put a square peg in a round hole with the car. There's just as many questions as there are answers. Casey acted inappropriately and made some mistakes and bad decisions. No shit, Sherlock. She should have called the police. Yes. She should have reported her death. Yes. That was never disputed. Baez poses a question that when Casey had friends in the car, that how come they didn't smell anything coming from the trunk? If the smell could be smelled 2 years later, then why could they not smell it? That's the big question, isn't it? On to the gas cans. And why would anyone report gas cans missing? And why is that duct tape on the can? Baez says it's not a coincidence, and if it was, it would be an incredible coincidence. So, you know, he knew before he called the police that this is what Kaylee did. You know, he knew it probably was Casey, but why did he call the police that time? It's a good question. Baez quite rightly points out that when George picked up the car from the tow yard and he smelled the smell of death, he didn't report it or get in contact with Casey to find out if she and Kaylee were okay. He went to work. That, to me, when I first heard that, it was like, if you hadn't seen your daughter or your granddaughter for as long as they hadn't seen her for, then they go up and pick the car up, knowing that it wasn't in the place where Casey said it was, the first thing you would have done was called your daughter to see if her and Kaylee were okay. Of course, it would have been a lie, but it would have shown that if that smell were as bad as what they said it was enough to cause concern. Baez then says that George did this because he wanted to distance himself from the situation, and says that George knew that Kaylee was dead. The evidence doesn't make sense, and if the state had made as much effort on the comings and goings of George as they did Casey, then the jury would probably have more answers. Don't know. So, Byers goes on to go through the list of people of who smelled what. So, the people that did smell something was Detective Bloisey, Michael Vincent, Cindy, but she only used that excuse to get the police to come to the house quicker, George and Neil Haskell. The people that didn't were Sanchez from the Amscot, Tony Lazaro, Charity Beasley, Maria Kish, Glenn, Sergeant Jose, Ryan Ebelin, Yuri Mellish, Brendan Fletcher, Adriana Acevedo. So this is huge reasonable doubt. There is more people that didn't smell something than did. So on to the lovely Brian Burner and the shovel, and how the prosecution are trying to make out that Casey borrowed the shovel to bury Kaylee, like she had helped her parents do with their pets, even though when she took the shovel back she wasn't sweating and the Anthonys had plenty of shovels in the shed. He has another good point, that they had the shovel tested and there was no evidence on that shovel that matched the actual scene. So, what was she doing with the shovel? Was she using it to open the padlock on the shed? Next, on to the trash/garbage and how it was altered by putting it in a dry room and the stain that the prosecution brought up. That's in the trunk of the car. So he compares it to the experiment that was done with the pig and the huge decompositional stain that left compared to the one in Casey's car. I mean, you can barely see it, and yes, there is a huge difference. Then he says there is no evidence of blood in the car and no DNA was found, suggesting that the prosecution was saying there was a stain there to play on the jury's emotions to make them think there was a stain there when there quite clearly isn't, and it's a clear sign that it's just the prosecution's desperation. I have to agree. The stain, I mean, it's barely visible, and the only thing that can correlate this is the smell that Dr. Vass tested. But other than that, compared to the experiment that was done with the pig and the stain that was in the car, huge difference. Now, my favourite subject, the hair, and the banding that they found in the hair, which they can't definitively say came from a dead body. Mainly due to the fact there is a limit as to the testing that can be done on hair right now. So the hair was found in the car, could have been there for months or years, but there's no testing available to prove otherwise yet. I mean, that hair could, as he says, been there years, months. So now we go on to the chloroform and how the state had Dr. Arpad Vass testify that he found a huge amount of chloroform when he performed the test. But Byers points out that Vass is not a chemist. And then he goes on to Marcus Weiss, who actually performed the tests, testified that they only performed a qualitative test and not a quantitative test. So they actually didn't know how much chloroform was found. Then the FBI chemist, Michael Rickenbach, told the court that there was, in fact, low levels of chloroform consistent with cleaning products. So again, there's doubt there again. And again, pointing out the fact that the FBI test was performed in a crime lab with strict protocols and rules, whereas Arpad's lab wasn't. Then Michael Sigman, a qualified chemist, testified that the main component was gasoline, who in fact was hired by the state and not the defence, and as was Michael Weiss and Michael Rickenbach. The defence only had one witness, which was Kenneth Furton, and the fact that the defence had to call them all up because the state wouldn't, because they wanted the actual evidence hidden. Well, it didn't. The evidence that they had didn't work in the prosecution's favour. So the computer searchers that turned up the searches for chloroform Ricardo Morales posted a meme about chloroform on MySpace, and this was while he was dating Casey. It shows on the report that on the computer the MySpace site was visited and then the search for chloroform was made. So, it's fair enough, but my question is that if you wanted to find out what chloroform was, why would you search for how to make chloroform and not what is chloroform? So on to the heart sticker that was found. He points out that the heart sticker was found on cardboard 30 feet away from the remains in an area where rubbish is dumped. Can you remember back when they were going through all the evidence and there was just tons of cans and bottles and just general rubbish? And that area is also very close to an elementary school. The stickers were found in Casey's room didn't match the one that was found either. In fact, there were numerous sheets of different stickers in Casey's room. So again, this is a very good point. There was also nothing found to suggest chloroform was used. The only evidence they have is the searches that were made on the computer. The autopsies didn't show any levels of chloroform, drugs or toxins. Nothing was found in the Anthony's home to suggest chloroform was made or purchased. Byers then shows the infamous photograph of Casey at the wedding she and her parents attended. And this is the first time I've seen this photograph. And how did her parents not know she was pregnant? Were they in denial? Because that photograph clearly shows that she is pregnant and not gaining weight due to a sedentary job. Absolutely bonkers. You're either in denial or you knew and chose to ignore it. I don't know how, but that blew my mind. Byers says he's not proud of what Casey did, meaning the lies, including all the made-up people or her imaginary friends, as he calls them, but none of it makes her a murderer. He says that the lies and people she made up were her safe place, and all this began way before Kaylee was born. I agree that her lies began before Kaylee was born. Her safe place, not sure what that means or why that would mean she would lie about having imaginary friends. But, the cover-up and everything, ignoring the fact that Kaylee was missing for so long and making up lies of what happened makes you look extremely guilty. But there's no proof to prove otherwise. It's been just such a hard, conflicting case. I mean, one minute you think yeah, and the next minute you think no. All the people that Casey was friends with, including family, all said she was a good mother, so basically that means she couldn't and wouldn't murder her own child. But in my opinion, plenty of good mothers have murdered their families, so her being a good mother means nothing as to why she would murder Kaylee. Now he is pushing the drowning theory due to Cindy lying about leaving the pool ladder up, the pool being easily accessible for Kaylee because of the lack of locks on the door inside the house, and the fact the day after Kaylee died, Cindy told co-workers that she thought someone was swimming in her pool. The photograph of Kaylee opening the door inside the house is now being shown, and this is proof of how easily Kaylee could get outside, and then the photograph of Kaylee climbing the ladder with Cindy. He points out how easily Kaylee is climbing up and that Cindy is barely helping her. So he is saying that the night before Kaylee died in June, Cindy went swimming and forgot to take the ladder off the pool, and then Kaylee the next day wanted to go swimming, got out on her own and drowned. Byers asked the jury to ask if they got a straightforward answer from George about the gas can and duct tape, and in all honesty, they didn't get a straightforward answer from George, period. So the video of George is shown again and is stopped at the moment. It shows a roll of duct tape on one of the tables. And then pointing out after they showed this video, George took the stand and said he didn't know where the duct tape had come from. The duct tape has been proven where it came from. Byers then says they are in no way blaming George Anthony, and there is no evidence to suggest that he had anything to do with Kaylee's death. He also says that they would never point the finger at anyone where there isn't any evidence to support it. But then he adds that it was an accident that snowballed out of control, and whatever happened afterwards has nothing to do with the crimes charged. Byers then makes a couple of other good points which I totally agree with, and they are that George almost enjoyed sparring with Byers when he was on the stand, and that George would dance around the truth. I honestly couldn't have put that better myself. I mean, I've said in previous videos that George very, very rarely gave a straight answer, and that he would go around their houses with his answers, and, you know, when he basically could have just said yes or no. And another lie George told was about Crystal Holloway. He had said that he was going to her apartment at night to console her because she had a brain tumour. She never had a brain tumour. I personally fully believe he had an affair with her. It is now brought up that Kaylee was found with no socks or shoes on, and Byers says that this is consistent with her being at home when she died, which is plausible, and that the clothes Kaylee was wearing were clothes that she hadn't worn in 6 months and didn't fit her. So did she get dressed herself? Did she just grab clothes? I mean, we all know what kids are like. I mean, my youngest is the same. He doesn't care what he puts on, he'll just put it on. As Byers says, things just don't add up in this case, which they totally don't. Therefore, there is reasonable doubt, and I absolutely agree. So he's now going through all the tests that were done. So, 1, there were no fingerprints found on the duct tape or the gas can. 2, no fingerprints on the duct tape from the scene on both sides. No fingerprints on the laundry bag. No DNA on the duct tape or the gas can. No DNA on the duct tape at the scene. No DNA on the paper towels. No DNA in the trunk. No blood in the trunk. No sticker on the duct tape from the scene. No chloroform on the car seat. No chloroform on the steering wheel, no chloroform in the bones, no quantitative analysis, no drugs in hair mass, no drugs in the bones. Next is the toxicology test results. 7 drugs were tested for and all came back negative. No prescription or over-the-counter and illicit drugs were found in the bones. No hairs exhibiting characteristics of apparent decomposition in or on vehicle or the residence. The soil examination results were Casey's shoes were negative, in the trunk were negative, and on the shovel were negative. So then he makes a statement saying that all these tests were done by one of the best labs in the world, and they found nothing, and there's no way Casey would have been dumb enough to dump Kaylee 19 feet away and then be smart enough to outsmart top scientists. Again, a good point. He then continues, no duct tape on the back of the skull, no human tissue on the duct tape, no duct tape covering the nose, no maggots in the trunk, no blowflies in the trunk, no discoloration inside the skull which would signify asphyxiation. There was no trauma found when the autopsy was done. There were no fractures found during the autopsy, no reports of child abuse whatsoever, no prior injuries, no cause of death. All this evidence adds up to one thing, that Kaylee died by accident, an accident that snowballed out of control. So he likes, you know, obviously Byers likes to use George's words against him, even though, you know. And now, Roy Kronk, that whole story is crazy, changing his story, not keeping on at law enforcement after finding Kaylee's remains, knowing it was more likely her, law enforcement not actually doing very much, so no wonder the prosecution didn't call him up. So, a good closing argument from Byers, you know, a lot of really good points. There is reasonable doubt there. So I will be back with part 2 in the next video. So until then, bye for now.